Hi, I'm Ebony Doyle, and I'm here with Professor Lipscomb and Congressman Ted Budd from the North Carolina 13th District. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, the cool thing is Congressman Budd's already been over here a couple times, and I can't remember ever at Bennett College a Republican candidate coming over and trying to win the votes of the Bennett students. So this, I think, is a special treat for the students to be able to hear both perspectives as they go into their vote on Tuesday.
Is that what I'm trying to do? Win all the votes here? It's great. We're on a new mission. We're just, look, I mean, we talked when I was, we had the UNCF event here, and we celebrated the loan deferment that I was able to get into legislation. That's kind of where this started, really, with your Professor Dawkins, or Dr. Dawkins, coming and seeing me, your school president. So I'm going to give her the credit for starting this relationship, and she's a great leader.
Well, we have to thank you for coming back because we also saw you earlier this school year too.
Yeah.
When you came back. So what made you want to be more active with Bennett and continue to come back to Bennett?
I mentioned before, Dr. Dawkins was in Washington, D.C., very concerned, probably, which predates me in politics. It goes back to 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. And that was a really hard period for this school. Enrollment was down some, which of course hurts the finances. But there was also an HBCU capital loan that was needing to be repaid, which was really causing a crunch for the school. And Dr. Dawkins, in her great leadership, working with Ladrigas Murray and other leaders at UNCF, got together in Washington to see me. And we bumped into each other, and she said, "May I have a minute of your time?" And we were off to somewhere else, and I just stopped everything. I said, "Absolutely." He said, "What's going on?" And she explained the situation to me, and I worked with our education specialist on we have a staff and a team of people that focus on different things. So we worked with Tyler on my team to really focus in on how we could help Bennett College, and there was a spending package that was being developed. And what they wanted was some language in there that would allow this loan repayment to be deferred. And it was somewhat of a make or break situation. And we were able to, working with Dr. Dawkins and UNCF, we were able to get that language right. And so if anybody out there is having a hard time sleeping, I think it's page 936 out of an 1,132 page bill. And it's about a page, but there's special language in there that allows a particular set of schools and to apply for this loan deferment. And then once they apply, then they have to be accepted. So first of all, the language was in there, and then the next step was working with the Department of Education to get it approved for Bennett, and we were able to get through both steps.
So I know you worked with Congresswoman Adams to put all this together. Mm-hmm. So one thing I'm curious about is when you get into Congress, do you generally have more friends that are of your party, or do you find that you sometimes make connections with people of the Democratic side?
Well, it's really some of both, and that would probably be surprising. I'm one of the 100 or so people that decide to stay in their office, right, rather than getting an apartment outside. So some people sleep on their couch and they get up and go the next day, but whatever. But it's a great setup. It keeps it light, and
so where do you?
I actually stay in my office. We've got a Murphy bed, and you go to bed about 11 o'clock at night, and you get up, me 5:30 or so in the morning, and except when I'm home, I get up a little earlier when I'm home. But then you go down to the gym, and it's very bipartisan. You can think of it's nothing fancy, of course. Imagine a 1992 YMCA that's in need of renovation. That's what the members' gym actually looks like. You've got men, women, Republican, Democrat there, so it's you've got 70 or 80 people there in the morning that are playing basketball, exercising, and that's a very bipartisan group, and you build friendships off of that. And we go out to breakfast occasionally, and that's a good across the aisle setting.
And then overall, the work part of being a congressman, what's that like? Is it a pretty fun job compared to other jobs you've had?
I don't know if I'd use the word fun, but I would say it's rewarding. The work rewarding. For me, this was something that Republicans supported, and the evidence shows that it's actually working. Is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and now we're seeing unemployment at a 49-year low. We haven't had unemployment this low since the late 1960s across our country. And North Carolina is a leader of that. Is one of the leaders. We are seeing women's unemployment at a 65-year low. We are seeing minority unemployment ever since that number's even been recorded. We're seeing that at an all-time low. And so the things that we've been able to do in this Congress have really helped. And I assume everybody at this college wants to eventually graduate, right?
Yeah.
Not just be cool, stay in school, right? But eventually you want to graduate. There are so many opportunities out there. And Tom, I would just give you a number, 7.1 million more opportunities than there are for people to fill those jobs. So take your pick when you're out there.
How much of that is cyclical, and how much do you think is directly related to policy?
You know, I would think there was a lot of pent-up demand, and when we were able, even before the December of 2017 passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we began rolling back some regulations. There was, you know, when we look at our financial institutions, community banks, the fastest growing department in these small community banks, in even the big banks, was the compliance department. Do these organizations have to have compliance? Absolutely. That's very essential that they follow the rules. But that was their fastest growing department. It wasn't providing more tellers or people out there that help the people that we see when we go to a bank or a credit union. And so it was becoming very difficult, and these banks and community organizations and community banks were starting to merge together, and they're becoming bigger and bigger, trying to deal with all this regulation. So when we start deregulating,
So like what was happening around here with the New Bridge Bank?
it's gone. Yeah, you don't see that name anymore. You see these banks having to merge to survive, which really doesn't end up helping the customer. And so when we start doing things like that, businesses say, "You're not against me," and they can take a shot, and they're willing to go out and borrow money and release capital into the workplace. Let me give you an example. Just a few miles from here, it's actually down in High Point, a women-owned furniture business. She went out to buy a power saw to grow her business. She has about 150 employees, 115, somewhere in there. But she said, "I'm going to buy a new power saw." Now, this isn't one like you go to Lowe's or Home Depot to buy. This is a $250,000 saw. And she said, "You know what? Because of this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I'm going to buy 4 of them. And then I'm going to hire more people." So it's little things like that, companies like that all around this region, all around across this country that is helping grow the economy.
And do you set goals for yourself, and how do you achieve your goals?
I always have been a goal setter, and you know, ever since early in life, if it's running a marathon, triathlon, you know, exercising, I've always been a goal setter. You know, business, I'm a small business owner, so what you want to do is you want to put good people around you that help support your goals. And I've got an amazing family I'm very blessed with, and I'm supportive of them, they're supportive of me. This is not a one-way street, right? I'm still a dad, I'm still a husband, you know, I'm still a small business owner. So, you know, I read a lot of things that help people, you know, to stay focused, and so you just got to get in the right environment and digest the right things.
So talking about sports, where does that winning the job of a congressman rank in terms of a victory? And what was it like to be there on election night and win that job in the first place?
Sure. So, I mean, there was once a day where I was wrestling with this with a family. Should I run in a primary? Because this is the result of the 2016 redistricting across the North Carolina 13 districts. This is something maybe one day I had wanted to do, but this came about faster than I expected. But then when I did sign up, it was once me in a car driving with a checkbook to Raleigh to file for this position, and you know, thinking about it, praying about it beforehand, asking my 3 kids what they thought about it, what it would look like to run, what it would look like if I were to happen to win. And the idea was that there would be 5 people to run for the primary, but there ended up being 17 of us. And then there were 5 Democrats, so there was 22 people in the 2016 race that eventually came down to me and one other. But really, you stay focused, you put good people around you. I mean, if that's a sports team, if that is you know, a campaign, I really think there's some similarities there.
Was it a big, I mean, what was the moment like when you won?
Well, there was 2. There was the primary, and that was the toughest challenge because that was a 17-way race.
Right.
For a Republican. For the Democrat, it was a 5-way race. So both, you know, 2 big challenges going on, and that ended in June 7th, I believe, of 2016.
Was the Republican primary tougher to win?
I think it was, but everything was so new. You just make sure you put max effort in the whole time, and so it was max effort on. And you really have to differentiate yourself when you're one among 17. So when we won that, we just had to really stay focused and connect with the voters. People like yourself, people unlike yourself, and to make people understood, what you stood for and. Will you be good for them? This role is not about me. This role is about those I'm elected to serve. And when you're out there and you're engaged with people, they can really sense if you're for them or not.
How close is this election going to be?
This will be tight. Yeah, this will be a real challenge. I've got a very formidable opponent, and I've commended her publicly that she threw her hat in the ring. This is a tense time for a lot of people in politics. I agree, and I commend her for throwing her hat in the ring.
It seems like the campaign's gotten a little rough. Have you met her personally, and what kind of personal relationship do you have with her?
I wouldn't say we go to dinner together regularly. No, these are it's a tight campaign. Numerically, it is. When we see each other in a studio, we're cordial with one another, very respectful. But I would also differentiate, Tom, between what is our ads, my ads, and what is outside ads. There's a big difference there, and sometimes those outside groups, they would say things in a way that I might not say them. So I would ask for people to pay attention to the last 2 seconds of an ad, because that's where the disclaimer is, and it says who's paying for the ad. So that really makes a big difference. But the ones we've done, we want to make sure we do our homework and that we're accurate. And this is about drawing a distinction, and it's for her, it's a turnout race. For me, it's a turnout race, making sure that people are engaged in voting.
I saw one about, you had mentioned that she has a lot of outside donors.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that's inherently bad? Being that this is the House itself has come down so close in terms of number of people in the House, I think that are you finding that there's a lot of outside money coming in?
Oh, absolutely. People? Yeah, and I would say when you look at hers, you look at somebody she's for instance, the issue of impeaching the president, impeaching Trump. There are people that like him, don't like him, people that don't like him that said, don't get caught up in the distraction of impeachment. But I would also say, and there's really been no evidence. Just because somebody tweets in a way you don't like, that's not an impeachable offense, right? But at the same time, there's an outside group that is supporting my opponent that's put $100 million in the race. Not this race, but races for Democrats across the U.S. Tom Steyer. So I would say that's indicative of what my opponent might believe.
Yeah, when I watch the president's leadership style, sometimes he seems to be almost running the country like a wrestling figure. And what I wonder is, your colleagues and you in the House, do you respect him as a credible, thoughtful leader, or behind the scenes are people have that same viewpoint of him?
So I would say there's a lot of people that say, boy, I wish he wouldn't say something like this or something like that, but what he actually accomplishes, what he tends to do is to surface issues that have not been dealt with in a long time. And then he gets them on the table so they can be dealt with. We look at North Korea, for instance. I was with years ago, I was a volunteer driver on a campaign, came home from college so I could, or grad school, so I could, help out with an event. And this U.S. Senator at the time, I asked him, and I said, what is the greatest threat to the U.S.? This was 21 years ago. And he said, no doubt, it's North Korea. What have we done in 21 years until this presidency? And finally, this is the only president to meet with somebody who could put all of our lives at risk.
I remember in the prior election there was sort of a feeling that you didn't meet with foreign dictators. Is your feeling that it's best to meet with everyone?
Well, I would say you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And certainly his style is unorthodox, but he's also very effective. I mean, the numbers I mentioned earlier. Minority unemployment at an all-time low. Overall unemployment since late 1960s. Women's unemployment 65-year low. You've got to look at the results, even if you're uncomfortable. I'm sorry, some feelings have gotten hurt, but look at the measurable things which help pay for college, which help pay down student debt, which help afford that next car. So those are things which in a very measurable way have improved. And I think when people look at that, they're going like, I'm not sure I like the Twitter, but Okay.
Do you think he's a thoughtful leader? In other words, do you think he studies history, and do you think he's somebody you respect professionally and personally?
So I was actually in the car with him less than a week ago. Spent about 30, 45 minutes with him one-on-one, and I found him to be, because you're always wondering these things, you hear the outside narrative for those who've not spent any time with him. I found him to be gentle, thoughtful, gracious, he knew exactly where he was, the dynamics of the local race. And he just has he has a great way with people on an individual basis. And then he understands. Look, he's a former TV personality, and he's a marketer, so he understands how to get people motivated, whether it's for him or against him. But he's very thoughtful, and you're asking me about history. I mean, he took me back to the tax code in 1913 and back into the history of tariffs into the 1880s. This was all on a car ride, and it was more than I was expecting, and I was impressed. And it drove me to do even more research, and so I was enlightened.
In terms of you actually have had a gun business. Now, a couple of the students, there was a situation of gun protests around. What could you tell people who don't know anything about the mechanics of guns that would inform legislation about gun laws?
First, my personal history, this was a business it had actually gone bankrupt in 2009. It was an indoor shooting range, and a police department needed this because they were driving a long way for their officers to practice. So they came to me, and they were my number one customer, my first customer and only customer at the time. And so this was a big deal to buy a business. And so I did, and they said, we're going to build our own practice facility, but until we do, would you be that for us? And by the way, never underestimate the need of the public to have a safe place to shoot. And that's actually the motto of the business, is helping our community responsibly enjoy firearms. It is a federally licensed firearms dealer. So remember, it has to have a license from the federal government, from the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, in order to be able to buy or sell firearms. There's a lot of training that goes on there. That's number one thing. It's safety, safety, safety. And what we see in all the firearm transactions, ATF occasionally calls back and double checks on some things. They do an audit. So, I mean, there's tremendous amount of regulation that goes on in there. Lots and lots of safety training. We think having an indoor range is actually good because it creates proficiency. You don't want to learn about firearms from Hollywood.
Right.
I see a lot of bad habits on the screen, and if people follow the safety rules.
I remember that even from Boy Scouts, the amount of safety, and you're always going to have crazy people that are going to find ways to kill people.
Yeah.
I was reading about the technology of where you could use a fingerprint. If they could develop a gun where you had to open it like your thumbprint, like on a cell phone, and it could be cost efficient, would that be a good development in your mind?
What you want with a firearm is something that is completely reliable, and even with something that is non-electronic, you're essentially dealing even today with technology that was developed in 1911. So we're 107 years into current technology, right? And there's not much that's changed. The different paint or the finishes or the shape may change, but the technology has been around since John Browning of 1911, and then what people call the AR-15 is something that's been around since 1956. So really, what's changing that I'm most concerned about is a really messy problem, and that is us. That is people. I think technology is changing us. I think family dynamics are changing us, and there are just a small fraction of people that are on the edge and are very concerning and are very dangerous. You can see somebody in Paris using a truck to kill 70 or 80 people, but it was a firearm that stopped that terrorist that running over people in France. So I would just say what you want is good people. You want good people to have them, and you want to stop bad people. And if you follow the process in the existing gun laws, that's what we end up with. But the problem is when people with either criminal or terrorist intent or with a mental illness where they'll cause harm to themselves or others, those are the three categories of people that you want remove guns from and eliminate the sale of guns to them.
So what are some things you want to do if you are reelected?
Sure. So I serve on the Financial Services Committee, but in one of the subcommittees is terrorism and illicit finance. So illegal financing, Bitcoin, blockchain, a lot of that's good. We deal a lot with the cryptocurrency world, and we want to make sure that's not used for nefarious purposes. So we're actually putting a stop to a lot of terrorism through the policies that we're implementing. But one of the great things we've been able to accomplish is human trafficking, is the stoppage of human trafficking, because so much of that uses illicit finance to make that happen. So we've done a lot on our committee to stop illegal any human trafficking. So we want to continue on that work, and that's stuff that really doesn't make the news a lot. So thanks for asking. Right. But I would also say we have to continue the economy. You asked if this is cyclical, right? Our economic growth. So I would say we have to make sure that we continue economic growth, because while you've got students in here, Ebony, a student, we want to make sure that when you graduate out there, that you have opportunities, and that we keep maintaining the economy so that it pays for so many things. Our social programs, our military, we've got to find a way to pay for all that, and the number one way you do that is having a strong economy. So I would say making sure we do that, and that's probably the main thing.
Do you have time to field a couple of questions from the political science
sure.
and journalism students?
Okay, so President Trump has recently said that he wants to kind of focus on the one part of the 14th Amendment that talks about babies who are born to illegal immigrants, but they're born in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you would be, do you think that that would be something that could actually come to pass? Do you think that he could actually have an impact on that part of the amendment with an executive order? And also, do you feel like it's important? Do you feel like that's something that needs to be addressed?
Do you mean, or does it require a constitutional amendment?
Yes, yeah.
So that's something that's ultimately going to be. Did you get the audio for that, you think? So, all right. So the question is about the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, if you could
Right.
restate it, and maybe discuss
I
what the
can't quite restate it
practical
as eloquently as that. All right.
but what the practical problem is that he's attempting to eliminate.
Correct. So what the president is trying to get at is a campaign promise that he made. And this is a president, something worth mentioning, who actually has figured out where he made a promise on the campaign trail, and then he's actually taking that name and date and written it on a whiteboard, and he actually goes through and marks off his promises.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
So that's something that he does. He actually wants to deliver on promises. This is the promise, not the 14th Amendment, Section 1 in particular. So if you read through it, there's actually, I think there's 5 or 6 sections of the 14th Amendment. And it was 1868 when that passed. So what he's trying to do is, it's not just about an executive order, it's making good on a promise to deal with the illegal, not immigration in particular, but the illegal side of immigration. I think we can all agree, Republican and Democrat, that we want immigration in this country. It's a good thing. Currently about 1 million people come in a year through legal, with an L, channels of immigration. So the courts are going to need to decide, is this something that could be done by executive order, or is this something that must be done by another amendment, or can this be done by legislation? So, but the real issue is getting to the core of dealing and surfacing these issues and dealing with them that have been kicked down the road for a long time. He's dealing with something that hasn't been dealt with, and he's bringing the issue up so that we can, as a nation, we can deal with it.
Would you feel comfortable in a position now to say whether you would support a constitutional amendment or not if the executive order is ruled unconstitutional?
That's something I'm going to have to take a really deep look at. I mean, I started this study yesterday when this issue really started surfacing, and you could see, I think, between Speaker Ryan and you can also see between the president, they both want to deal with this issue of illegal immigration. But I think both would agree that we do need legal immigration. So. And again, this is something that we're going to have to let the courts decide on.
When Bush and McCain were in there was a lot of efforts towards bipartisan immigration reform. Do you see there being a point where we could get there?
I don't know in particular on this issue. It's really going to depend. You know, there's essentially several pillars. There's securing the border, ending diversity visa, ending the diversity lottery, the random diversity lottery, and also chain migration, ending that. and then fixing the DACA challenge. So I think if you can accomplish those 4 things, then you've got some pretty good legislation. Now, 80% of the things that come to the House floor and pass, with a majority of 218, 80% of those things have bipartisan support. So while the partisan things are the ones that surface up, because I think for TV to work, like this is the media studies division of the school right here, right? For TV to work, it has to have tension. For news to work, it has to have tension. So it's anything that's a challenge on the House floor or a challenge between the House and the Senate or that has conflict, that's the stuff that makes it onto the news. But please realize there's a lot of boring stuff we do that really helps. And, it's the 80% that doesn't tend to make the news.
Mm-hmm.
What has inspired you to join politics, and how has it impacted your life and those around you?
So what's inspired me to join politics, and what was the second part of your question?
How has it impacted you and those around you?
How has it impacted me and those around me? So I'm going to say those around me are certainly my family. I have 3 teenagers, right? One more year of having 3 teenagers. I have a 19-year-old who's now a freshman in college. So I would say you start with them, and I would say it stretches you. Anytime you do something big, if it's for graduating from high school, if it's graduating from college, those are all landmark things in all of our lives, and it stretches you. It's supposed to stretch you, and this is a tough job. And but I'm grateful for how it's changed me. It's made me more thoughtful. It's made me really. It's enhanced my gratitude. I'm a grateful person. I was before this started, but I think I even have a bigger spirit of gratitude now about how amazing this country is, how diverse it is, how much opportunity there is. Those who've gone before us and faced big challenges. I'm very thankful. So I think that's probably the biggest way that I've been stretched.
Is your family a good source as far as bouncing ideas off of? Do they ever have different political ideas and then you go back and forth, or what's that like internally with the family?
They ask a lot of questions, and of course, it was starting at the dinner table back in 2016. It was talking about what it'd be like and what would be the challenges, and some of it's logistics, right? There's less of me to go around. There's a messy toolbox when it used to look pretty neat when I was home right now, because I don't get as many projects done around the house. There's things like that need to be done. So there's less of me around.
Do you talk about the political issues with your kids, or do they have different minds about things?
I would say they're, of course, they're obviously younger, right? And they haven't had the life experience. But I would say they're pretty much in line, but they certainly have the freedom to develop their own opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Alexis.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
So do you want me to just do all of them now? Or
You're your best one.
Let's do one at a time.
One at a time?
And then somebody might jump in if they want to share.
Okay.
All right.
They're all pretty important. Can I just start with 2?
Let's do your best one, because he's going to be called to his next meeting.
Okay. What is your thoughts on how to handle the culture behind police brutality and how us as African American women view the police?
So part of that would involve me being 100% in your shoes, and I wish I was, so I could really speak from your perspective. But I want to first of all just approach it with empathy and saying, what do we do here? How do we understand a tense history and a tense past, and yet how do we honor those who wish to enforce the rule of law? That's something that it's something I'm learning on an ongoing basis, and realizing, I grew up in one combination of rural environment where at the end of my driveway you would have us as farmers and small business people, and at the driveway would come together with an African American family, and these are people we would ride share to school. So I understand it a little bit from that perspective. It's a little more rural. And then we had a business in town that was pretty diverse. So I understand it a little bit from that perspective, but I'm going to have to just say, Alexis, this is something I'm learning and I'm very open to as we go along. It's more of a posture, I would say, of openness and learning and just mutual respect, and just trying to alleviate pressure rather than increase it.
Is there a technological solution to that if you were to get every police officer to have live streaming cams? I know in Greensboro is one of the first departments to have the cameras, but the officers themselves turn them on and off, and theoretically the footage could not get uploaded, and it's done for administrative reasons. It's not even done for training videos, which it could be useful for. Do you think that live streaming gives a technological solution to that issue?
I think it serves as a great platform for what could be helpful. I am not familiar with what you said as the turning on and turning off, but I do know you have a great leadership in the Greensboro Police Department. When I've talked to Chief Scott, saw him the other night, at the rally against hate and violence, he was there and chatted with him. But I really think he has that posture, that disposition of wanting to understand. So I think he's just trying to find that balance. I think we're all trying to find that balance.
Let's get one more. Somebody else have one?
I have
Nah. All right, then you get one more, Alexis.
All right.
okay. What are your thoughts on women in North Carolina not being able to get a pap smear until they're 21? Pap smears are used to detect several things, like STDs, cancer, etc. What are your thoughts on that? Because I feel that it's really dangerous for women to have to wait. I know in plenty of other states, I'm from Maryland, you are allowed to get a pap smear as soon as you have your period.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that?
We'll leave it to Bennett College to ask these tough questions of a guy, right?
Did you have any sisters growing up?
No, I still have a great mom who, a breast cancer survivor, right? And so this is something, I think it doesn't come down to the legality of the testing. This is me living on the precipice of my knowledge here, Alexis. So I would say it's not about the legality, it's about the funding, and that's something I'm going to have to do more research on.
Okay, Evan, do you have anything to say before we wrap up? And we appreciate you being so generous with your time.
Absolutely, it's an honor to be here. I always love being on campus.
She asked what I was going to. That was a great question. I was thinking it.
So Alexis took your question?
I was thinking that.
Great.
Okay, so we've got people here who are still going to vote, right?
Yeah.
Let's give you the last word if you want to say anything about how people could contact you, or if you want to make one final pitch for their vote before Tuesday or whenever they choose to go out between now and then.
Right. Well, thank you for the time, Tom, Ebony. I really appreciate you letting me be here. I love being on this campus. I love the questions that you've asked. And of course, when we had the UNCF celebration several weeks ago, it was a great day to talk about how we've helped this college to remain strong. So people vote for a lot of different reasons and a lot of different issues. One of them is their alma mater, right here. It could be for Bennett, and this is certainly something that having a district that has 3 HBCUs in, it's North Carolina A&T, it's here at Bennett, and it's Livingstone down in Salisbury. So it's certainly something that I have a proven track record of supporting. But then back to what I mentioned earlier, Ebony, you're all hopefully going to graduate, right?
Yeah.
All right, so good. So when you
Don't
graduate,
try to rush her out of here.
No.
We need her for a couple more years.
a little bit more of the be cool, stay in school thing, right? So, but when you graduate, I want there to be tremendous opportunity in your given field. If it's healthcare, if it's biology, there's a lot of different majors here. If it's journalism, like we're talking about today, then I want you to have a great economy that supports your God-given talent. And by going out into the workforce, you're going to be job creators yourselves. So I want to create a lot of value out there that makes it easier for you once you graduate. And so far, we've got a good track record at doing that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks to our studio audience. And we'll be watching very closely over the next few days to see how the election turns out.
Thank
Ebony,
you for stopping by.
Thank you so much for having me. All right.
All right.
Tom,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.